There we go. No, all underway. I've just hit record, but before we were recording, I was just complimenting on your rapid hair growth, and I was saying that yeah, for myself, I've got the short back and sides again, a little bit of length on top because long hair didn't work for me as well as it did for you. So obviously these are going up on YouTube now, so everyone's going to get the pleasure to look at your good-looking head and your new. I think it's an enlightenment haircut. It's what happens when you reach some form of enlightenment. The hair gets long, but you were saying you can't commit to the beard yet because it's too shabby, is it?
Yeah, it's a patchy. If I go for the beard, it's extremely patchy. I always thought, I'm in my 40s now, and I thought as I get older, I'll probably be able to, pull out a decent beard, but it's never happened.
I was going to say, I'm 34, and I can get pretty thick in the mustache and like a really average goatee. It gets super dark. But I've got a 1.5-year-old now, 9 days old. Our last podcast, 1.5 now, or nearly 1.5. And his cheeks has as much hair as me. So I'm thinking, the WOG gene in my family didn't quite filter down to me, I don't think. Which could be a good thing. My dad's back and shoulders are probably hairier than any man wants.
Yeah.
What's been going on, man?
Oh yeah, we've been busy since we last spoke. Big news on our side really has been obviously we've launched fueling products alongside the hydration stuff so that we can complete the picture for athletes, both in terms of fueling advice and products to give you carbohydrate energy when you're training and racing. So that's been a huge project. Other than that, we've just been, putting one foot in front of the other, really grinding away and continuing to build tools, improve the website, improve the education and the blogs, grow the newsletter. Yeah, just same, but trying to double down really.
And I was having a flick through some of the blogs just before I got on here with you, and I was well aware of the fact that you guys had been expanding the range a little bit, and I was thinking, mate, I'm so glad that you're in control, because when it comes to organizing like anything hydration or anything fueling or anything with the word science attached to it, I would start to panic and get flustered and go, you know what, I'm not 100% sure where to start. So where do you even, I was curious to find out when it comes to like launching a new range, and we'll get into that, fairly soon and speak about what it is that you've been tapping into. But like, where do you guys even start? Have you got the scientists under your roof, or do you go to like an independent source, or what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose we start off with coming at it from two distinct angles. One is we read all the literature that's out there, the scientific literature around, for example, if you're looking at carbohydrate supplementation for athletes, then there is a treasure trove of like scientific literature out there, which you have to have the right sort of mindset to be able to sit there and chunk through it. And I've got a sports science background, so I can read the papers. We've also got Abby and Emily on the team now, who are both sports scientists, and they do a phenomenal job. Abby's particularly good she's studying for her IOC diploma in sports nutrition as well as her sports science. So she's happy and very adept at sitting and chunking through papers, writing little précis for us to say. And then we start to look at, obviously, the other thing that is useful is organizations like, for example, the Australian Institute of Sport, the equivalent in the UK, they put out guidelines and position statements on what the science recommends for athletes, and that then is where it steps from being like theoretical and lab based a little bit more into probably what's practical recommendation. So that starts the process of then underpinning the theory of what direction we might want to be going in with a product. And then from the other side, from totally the other side, we're a team of athletes, and we come at it and we buy all the products that we can find on the market. We talk about ones that we've used. We talk about what's working, what's not, what we like, what we dislike, any gaps that we can see. And I suppose then you just basically winnowing it down to a spec. And then in our case, then it's a case, like when we wanted to make an energy gel, but we didn't want to just go to a manufacturer and sort of do a off the shelf energy gel. We had a very particular way we want it to taste and feel and all that sort of stuff, as well as perform. So we actually literally got busy in the kitchen. And a friend of ours who who's a customer of ours and a friend who's in the local area, has a little catering type business, so called Totally Wonder Fuel, and that's Mel. And she came in and literally we hand mixed, we hand mixed a load of stuff. Then once we'd started to refine the ingredients, then we start to work with a manufacturing partner, and it's all that. It's just all those steps, to then figuring out where you've got to compromise, if you've got to compromise, what's possible, because what you can make in your kitchen at home may not be easy to replicate at scale. When you might want to make a batch of 100,000 gels, it's different what you can make on the stove. So we did all that, and yeah, it's just then you just keep chunking away. But where we've got to on that product in particular, on the gel, is I think we're really proud of it, because we've kind of, on the science side, the strongest bit of evidence that is out there for fueling for athletes really is that despite what gets marketed to people, the most important thing with energy consumption during exercise is not what type of carbohydrate you have, or whether it's a hydrogel or whether it's a this or that. It's like, how much carbohydrate do you take per hour? That's the number one thing. Obviously, it's got to be digestible and simple, but it's like, how much do you take per hour? And all the recommendations are kind of like banded 30, 60, 90. And if you talk to some of the elite athletes these days, maybe even 100, 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So this 30, 60, 90, 120 approach. Yet one thing we identified straight away is like, loads of energy gels have 22 grams or 26 grams or 20. So they're not inconvenient units when it comes to athletes working out. So we thought straight away, we're going to try to make a gel with 30 grams of carbs in it, because when you make a recommendation, when you read a recommendation that says you need to take 60 grams an hour, well, if your gel's got 22 grams in it, it's not quite 3. It's sort of a bit more than 2, though. It just didn't seem to be particularly convenient. And we thought, why don't we simplify that? So that was that's just a conceptual thing. And on the packaging, it's 30 on the front. It's pretty obvious. And then on the functional side, we wanted to, I guess, loads of people, the standard retort from a lot of runners and triathletes and cyclists, like they'll eat energy gels, but they don't like them. A lot of people say, I don't like gels. I mean, they'll use them because it's a necessary evil, but we thought we need to work on the texture and flavor, so that we're not trying to make something gourmet, because a lot of gel companies, they will make a double chocolate one or a caramel one or a raspberry pie or something like that. And we've always thought I don't know, we just wanted something plain and simple, and that was, this is a functional food that you eat when you're exercising. So we've gone for a totally plain, it's very, very, there's no flavor essentially. It's a little bit sweet because it's carbohydrate, and it's not syrupy, so it's not sticky, but it's also not too hard. And we've worked really, really hard to get that texture consistency right. And what's been brilliant is the early feedback has been, I've lost count of the number of emails we've had from people who said, I gave this a try. I hate energy gels, but I gave this a try, and actually this one's okay. And we take that as a huge compliment, because what we're not trying to do is create something that you would take on a family picnic. It's not a food that you would choose to eat above all other foods, but what we want is something you can bang down 20 of these if you're doing an ultra and not feel too sick of them. So we try to marry those things up, and I think where we've landed on that particular product is hopefully with something really good. And then alongside it, just as importantly, we've created a little calculator on the website, so you can bang in there a little bit of information about what sport you're doing, you're running, how long are you running for, what kind of intensity is that at, and it will spit out a recommendation of how many grams of carbs per hour. Because I've always felt that's a simple tool that's kind of largely missing. A lot of people who are going to run a marathon, for example, they have an appreciation, I'm going to need to take some energy on board, but like, how much, how many gels does that represent or whatever? So we've tried to, as we always do, try to plug that educational gap alongside the product.
Yeah, that was what I liked about the last conversation that I had with you. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but essentially it was like a little introductory quiz that anyone who, I think it was, from memory, we were talking about that we're talking about like different kinds of sweaters and the way and the volume that people sweat, and just what particular products might be good based on that. And I thought, even for me as a bloke who's been in and around the sport of distance running for over 20 years now, like if you had have asked me, what do I need in order to make sure that I'm effectively fueled, effectively hydrated, I would have gone like, all right, well, just drink a fair bit. Do you know what I mean? Make sure your weed's clear, and then like you're good to go. And that's a bloke who's been in the scene for a long time. So I'm sure that even my knowledge on it is probably a little bit ahead of what the general population is. So that was nice. And I think just that individual, that personalized approach was, it gave me like a little bit more confidence in what it was, what I was actually purchasing, or what I was actually getting from you guys. And the other side of that is, I was just going to touch on what you said. It's so interesting. It's almost universal, especially amongst runners. I'm not sure if we're just a lot of bitches or whether there's something in this, but it's never an enjoyable experience for too many runners. There's not too many athletes out there I know who have the attitude that, hey, I absolutely just love consuming gels. It's always a, oh, you know, I had to really get my gut used to it. I had to get used to the texture. I had to get used to that feeling in my tongue. And I was the same. I ran my first marathon in 2018. I hadn't met you guys then, and I had no idea what it was I was doing. I just lined up with about 5 gels in my pocket and wished myself the best of luck. And that was definitely the wrong idea, because it was just painful, and it was definitely not an enjoyable experience. So and also just like the idea with carbohydrates in running, like there's too many athletes with horror stories of shitting their pants halfway through a run, or having to go into the bush to drop off a little bit of extra carbs. So I'm not sure what the cyclists seem to handle it a little bit better than a lot of runners, but there's been a few horror stories. So it sounds like you guys have really tried to address the horror side of the industry and just smarten it up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely trying to do those two things, trying to educate runners on, okay, well, what does the science and what does experience tell us that is a reasonable amount of carbohydrate for you to take to support whatever intensity and duration of performance you're trying to achieve. And then also what you've mentioned there is, I think it's a generalization, but runners are more likely, because if your average running training session in a week is probably going to be less than an hour for most people. Yes, even long distance runners will do longer runs, but they're infrequent. So a lot of runners don't eat regularly or don't take on carbs regularly during training sessions, because you don't need to do it to support short sessions. When you come to race day, though, especially if you're racing long and you suddenly start challenging the body with loads and loads of energy intake, that can cause digestive problems because you're just not used to it. So whereas a lot of cyclists, clearly they'll ride a lot of long rides where they eat regularly. I think it's probably got a little bit to do with the mechanical movement as well. You're jiggling around when you're running. You're moving up and down. We know it's harder to digest stuff rather than sat relatively stable on the bike. So one of the things that we've started to write some plans for is like people doing a marathon or an ultra is as well as doing a training program for the rest of your body, you do a gut training program. So you start taking in a bit more carbohydrate selectively during some of your longer and harder sessions, and you just turn the amount up, because your digestive system can be trained, it can adapt a little bit, and that's been proven by a lot of elite athletes who've undertaken sort of structured plans to move their carbohydrate intake up. And so that's another concept that we're just trying to help people get their heads around, is that you basically just need to give your body a chance to avoid those kind of issues, because the last thing you want is to be like, you're going to lose minutes if you're finding a portaloo halfway around the marathon or diving in a bush when you're doing an ultra. That's not
true. It's so true, man. So do you guys, as a little bit of a start point for anyone, I'll link it in the show notes below. I can't remember exactly the number. It was August 30th last year that our last episode went up, and that was more getting started with more of an individualized hydration plan, like I touched on a minute ago. But for people who might not have heard you speak about this, and they might not have even looked into the idea of effectively using carbohydrates and hydration to I guess complement their training program, where do you even start with something like this? Because obviously it's a bigger, broader conversation than just liquids and gels and things like that. Obviously, the diet is a huge part of it, and I'm not sure how much of the focus on the website and through Precision Hydration you do with the diet and stuff. But do you have like a general guide to all right, if you've never even set foot in this territory before, but you're curious to sort of start making practical changes, what does that look like? Where do you start?
Yeah, what I'd say is that there's, to break it down, to really, really simplify it, when you're exercising, your body needs three things from a kind of nutrition hydration standpoint. You need water to replace what you're losing in your sweat. You need electrolytes, sodium particularly, to replace what you're losing in that sweat. And you need some energy, usually in the form of carbs, because you're burning energy and at some point your glycogen runs out. Now, those three things are on a sliding scale that go from, like, you need 0, for example, if you're obviously running a 5K or something like that, and you're just not going for long enough because your body's got enough reserves, right through to when you're doing an ultra. We've got some case studies on our website now where, you see people drinking 600 or 700 milliliters of fluid an hour, taking 1,000 milligrams of sodium an hour, and eating 75 grams of carbohydrate an hour, for example, for a 20-hour run. And so we're starting to just get your head around the fact that there's these three things, and your job as a runner is to start to figure out, okay, beyond a certain intensity and duration, I'm going to need to take water, salts, and calories. Mm-hmm. And then really it's diving into, like, how much of those things do you need to take? And so there is a blog on our website, actually. We call those things the 3 levers, because they're the kind of 3 levers that you can pull to enhance or to maintain your performance. And there's a blog on our website about that, which we can link to for your show notes, which is probably a great place to start, because it kind of breaks all of that down and starts to give you an idea. And then beyond that, we've got these tools, like you've talked about. The online sweat test that we have is a click-through guide where it asks you some questions about the type of environment you train in, how sweaty you are effectively, how long you run for. And then that will spit out not an exact hydration prescription, because no such thing exists, but it will spit out some guardrails for you to say, actually, Tyson, based on what you're doing here, it sounds like you might need X or Y type of fluid and in roughly this volume. And then it kind of gives you tips on going out and trial and error in that. And alongside it now, we've got this carb calculator, so that will also give you an idea of how much energy to take in. And what that's all about is really stripping out all the confusing jargon and BS, really, and just giving you guardrails on fluid, sodium, carbs, to go away and then play within that framework and see what works for you. And that, it's a trial and error process, really. Beyond that, you want good habits to get into, obviously, are when you turn up to a training session or a run, you need to understand that you want to be starting well hydrated, that you're starting with your energy levels sufficient for whatever you've got to do. Particularly if it's a race, you want to be, like, fully hydrated, fully carb loaded, and that kind of thing. And if you get those two things right, I'm not going to say, like, your day-to-day diet, and that the day-to-day diet isn't something which I have a lot of interest in that personally, and I really try and be careful about what I eat and that sort of thing. But professionally, we're not we're not dietitians or nutritionists. What we are is we're heavily focused on and experienced in that exercise window, like fueling the work that you're doing and hydrating the work you're doing is that piece. And I think there's a lot of resources that we could link to that are on our site, that if someone's thinking, where the hell do I start with this? There's a few articles to read and that sort of thing to help steer them in the right direction.
Yeah, man, it's nice. I love the idea of the 3 levers. It's just any way you can boil down complicated science for me. If you can give me 3 levers, you've got my attention straight away, and my chances of actually absorbing what it is that you're trying to tell me is so much higher. Because unlike you, like, the idea of trying to read through scientific papers and stuff, I go, you know what? I'll leave that to Andy Blow. I'll let you boil it down for me, translate it for me, and help me understand it. It's a skill that I find it a really helpful skill when people can do that. So it's I was having a bit of a flick through one of the emails that was going back and forth between us before we started this, and the 3 levers really stood out to me. But man, just on a more practical scale, or another practical scale, like, are there any really common mistakes that you see people make when it comes to hydration? Because one of the things that I hear get thrown around fairly casually amongst a lot of people is, the old classic one was 8 glasses of water a day. And then there's some more complex calculations as to how much water and stuff you should be having. Or my old sports doctor, man, I don't know if you heard this one before. She recommended that I had 50% sports drink and 50% water a few years ago, which I did for probably 6 months. And I think I was drinking Staminade. And I had a look at the back of it one day, and I thought, man, this is a lot of stuff going into my system at all times. And I didn't necessarily feel that much better for it. And it just seemed like a fairly high ratio of water to sports drink to be consuming. So, like, are there, like, when it comes to just general hydration of what you should be doing on a daily basis, are there certain things you should be having, certain things you should be avoiding?
Yeah, I think, one of your first point about 8 glasses of water a day or whatever, one of the big misconceptions is that there's any sort of simple formulaic answer you can give as to how much people need to drink, because your body is a dynamic system that is constantly self-correcting. And if we think about hydration a lot as athletes, particularly if we're training in hot weather, because obviously you perspire a lot, you lose a lot of body fluid, and that means you've got to drink quite a lot in comparison. The idea of there being a standard amount that any one person needs, though, is ridiculous, because the variance is so huge. We can definitely say that everyone needs to drink every day. No one can get by with zero fluid, but it's beyond that. There are very few definites. Some people who have low sweat rates, who don't train a lot in warm weather, who don't lose a lot of fluid, really don't need to drink that much more than a regular person, especially if their training load isn't heavier. They just listen to their body, they drink when they're thirsty, and everything works out fine. Right at the other end of the spectrum, we work with some competitive and elite athletes who train very, very hard, often in hot weather, for multiple hours a day. And hydration for them is like a critical, proactive part of their routine. We're working with a tennis player actually at the moment, who's a very, very highly ranked in the world. He sweats like 3 to 3.5 liters per hour during practice sessions, because when he told me this at first, I was like, yeah, I think you're working this out wrong. But then we've done a lot of testing. We've done a lot of weighing him before and after training sessions, taking into account why he's drunk. You can see it on the guy. He's like, and for him, hydration is like, he has to drink liters and liters of fluid every day with tons of electrolytes, either with it or in it, in order to, because we track his body weight each morning to make sure that he's not getting progressively dehydrated over the course of a training week or a tournament. And if he's not actively thinking about drinking almost constantly around these sessions and things, he runs into all sorts of trouble. So I think that isn't helpful in one sense of answering your question, that like, what are people, what's a common thing? But I think a common misconception is that there's like an answer that applies broadly to everyone. It's really individual, and it's really driven by your physiology, your training habits, and the environment you live in. We all know that if you move to a hot climate, your fluid intake needs to go up. Your sweat rate can easily triple for the same run. If you were running over here in the UK, we're talking in, like 1st of December, it's cold here. I can go out for a run for an hour, and I'll sweat, but it's not going to be massive. That same run in Florida in August, I could lose maybe 3 liters myself. So there's that kind of, it's got to be index linked. The amount that you drink is going to somehow be reflected in the amount that you sweat. And I think what a common misconception we do definitely come across all the time is that people have in their head, a lot of people who are health conscious or trying to get fit will think, oh, I don't drink enough. And they start just drinking loads, and they start drinking loads of water if they're training hard. And that can have a detrimental effect if you go too far, because clearly not drinking enough leads to progressive dehydration, and that can be problematic. But your body's pretty good at correcting for that, because it makes you thirsty. If you If you just over drink though, and you mentioned this just as a throwaway comment earlier, but your wee tends to go relatively clear because your body's got excess fluid, it's passing out. And that, people see that as a sign that, oh, okay, my wee needs to be clear because that means I'm well hydrated. Well, it could mean that you're relatively well hydrated, but it could also mean you're just drinking too much. Because when you're drinking lots, weeing a lot, you're flushing out a lot of electrolytes. And the amount of athletes that we see who go too far the other way and over drink plain water because they're paranoid about getting dehydrated is not insignificant. So it's really important to remember that hydration is a balancing act, and your physiology, your training habits, and your environment are going to dictate what you need to do. And at some point, when you start to train a bit harder, when the environment gets a bit hotter, when when you're losing more sweat in every day or every week, that's when you need to start looking at, okay, probably supplementing electrolytes alongside water and drinking in more appropriate amounts and being a bit more proactive. So to give you a concrete example of that, if I was going to go out and do a 90-minute to 2-hour run in hot conditions in the summer, I would be very proactive in pre-hydrating. So something called preloading, where you take a very strong electrolyte drink. We make one called pH 1500 because it has 1500 milligrams of sodium in a liter. I would drink probably half a liter of that an hour or so before I go out to try and top up my tanks, so that it's going to give me a bit of extra reserves to get through that run. And I'll probably do the same again immediately after the run, because if I'm going to recover sufficiently from that, then I need to get those fluids and salts back in quickly. I could probably do that same run in cold conditions in the winter, and the need to sort of preload and rehydrate afterwards is dramatically reduced because my sweat loss is going to be so much less. So it's like tailoring your intake to what you're doing is probably the biggest practical tip, and being prepared to be dynamic with that.
Yeah, I've got this memory, just as you were speaking about the that common misconception of just making sure that you're drinking enough water, and so many athletes sort of got taking it to the extreme. My best mate over here years ago now, I remember he was training for the Melbourne Marathon, and he wasn't overly focused on hydration in the lead up to it. And then the day before, he panicked. He's like, "Oh no, I'm running a marathon tomorrow. I better make sure I'm super hydrated." And he said he took his hydration just way too far. And I can't remember. I think it was something crazy, like 4 or 5 liters he drank the day before. And he said he reckons that the morning he woke up, he almost felt, I don't know if this was related, but he said he almost felt a little bit fluey. And he said he looked into it a little bit more, and he reckons he had drank so much that so much of the essential stuff that he probably needed in his body was just flushed out. And he had a shocker of a run. He was hoping to break 3 hours, and he ended up running nearly 3:40, which, by a lot of people's standard is fine. But based on this guy's ability, and sure, there's other factors that it might have been. But I just thought that was interesting that hydration was such a standout point to him. And he just felt like so much of what he probably needed inside him was not there.
Yeah, he'd probably diluted his sodium levels down, which is a condition called hyponatremia. And it does ruin a lot of people's races. It actually, if you really take it to the extreme, it kills a few people in marathons and Ironmans every year. Again, there's a great, if people are interested in hyponatremia, there's a great article on our website called "What is Hyponatremia and How to Avoid It?" because it's one of the things that's been leveled at the sports drink industry as being at fault for in the past, with this, encouragement that everyone got through the 90s, early 2000s to just drink as much as you can. You need to drink, it was a big message that was pushed by a lot of the big sports drink companies and the bottled water industry and that sort of thing. And it's definitely, I think you get this kind of perfect storm before a race, especially if the race is long and it's in the heat, where people just go a little bit crazy. We all go a bit crazy in the week leading up to a race because you're nervous, especially if you've got a lot invested in the performance. You think it's going to be hot. So you sort of think, well, I've got to be hydrated, and therefore I'll drink a bit more water. And then because you're a sort of motivated individual who doesn't do things by halves, you really double down and you drink a lot more water. And you think, well, I've just got to like go for this and really drink a lot. And that kind of pre-race nerves, the slight craziness that you get in a taper, the fact that the race is building up, you're reducing your training load, so you're not sweating as much anyway. You've got loads of time sat around because you're resting. You may be walking around an expo with a water bottle, and before you know it, you can easily considerably overdrink and then end up in a pretty bad way, because you dilute the sodium levels in your blood. That then causes a cascade of knock-on effects. You know, you can absorb, your body cells start to absorb water and swell up. That's why people get cognitive dysfunction. It swells up your brain, and it can make you feel really crappy. And then, of course, once you start running, you start sweating, you start losing more electrolytes, and it kind of gets worse and worse. Basically, it just spirals out of control.
Yeah. So when it comes to sodium, obviously with such a big focus, what is the role that sodium's playing? Because I've been I would love you to tell me that you can tell I'm in bulk phase at the moment. Haven't really been disciplined enough to it. I had a bet with a mate that I got on the scales about a month and a half ago, and I weighed 76 kilos. I don't know. Do you guys do kilos over there?
Do yeah.
Of course you do. We just copy we're from you, so of course you do. So I jumped on the scales a couple of months ago, and I was 76.5. My ribs were starting to show again. I thought, oh my gosh, like I've been here for too long in my life. So I messaged a mate and I said, oh, if I don't weigh 80 kilos by January the 31st, I owe you $500. So as a result, I've started just to put my nutrition into MyFitnessPal on a daily basis. And one thing that I'm always way over in is sodium, and it stands out to me. And I think I have like this coconut milk, like quite a lot of it each day. And I think one of the basic ingredients, maybe it's just to keep its shelf life a bit more or something, is I think it's got a little bit of salt through it. And I'm always like, oh, gee, because I sort of rack my brain as to where it all came from. And that's the only thing I can boil it down to. Is there like, is that a concern? Like when it comes to sodium, obviously it's playing an important role, but the flip side of that is too much sodium in your, is that, first of all, is that possible? I'm sure it is. And second of all, sort of what role is it that sodium's playing? I'm guessing something to do with like muscular performance and, preventing cramps and things like that.
Yeah. So sodium is an essential electrolyte in the body, and along with potassium, magnesium, calcium, and lots of other ions, it plays a role in lots of different things. So sodium's the main electrolyte that's in your extracellular fluid, so the fluid that's outside your cells, and potassium is the main electrolyte that's inside your body's cells. So the electrical gradient between those two compartments drives things like cellular communication, the way that cells communicate, so it will have impacts on your nerve impulse transmission. It will have it's integral to muscle contraction and muscle relaxation. So it really does kind of the electrolytes play a load of critical roles in different parts of the body, but particularly in those areas. And sodium also is heavily involved in fluid balance, because if you put more sodium into the body works to keep the level of sodium in body fluids consistent, homeostasis in to keep it balanced. So when you take on more sodium, you will tend to hold on to more fluid slightly, and vice versa, which is why you see people who go on ketogenic diets who drop a lot of body water through losing a lot of carbohydrate. They often need to take on more salt to hydrate. It's why sodium is implicated in blood pressure elevation, and high blood pressure is a problem for a lot of people in the Western world. And so in general, recommended sodium levels in the diet are quite low for most people. The irony is that for athletes who are sweating a lot, the general population levels for sodium recommendations could be in some cases quite low, or even too low, because of the amount of sweating we do. So if you sweat out, I lose about 1.5 to 2 grams of sodium per liter of sweat. I'm a salty sweater. And if I do a few hours of sweating in a single day, I can easily sweat out, let's say 6,000 or 7,000 milligrams of sodium, which is like two and a bit times the recommended daily amount. So I'm guessing that in MyFitnessPal, the level of sodium recommendation is pretty low, which is probably sensible for most for most people, because a lot of people do get too much sodium in their diet. For athletes though, who are training a lot, there's no allowance for that to move. It's a bit like calories. You say the average, the recommended calories is for a guy is 2,000 or 2,500, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, if you do a 3-hour run in that day, you ain't going to squeak by on 2,000 calories.
Yeah, I have that for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. So it needs to be dynamic. So I think sodium recommendations in general are low because most people relatively overconsume sodium. A cohort, a subset of athletes, particularly those that are training in the heat or have high sweat rates or high sodium loss, the recommendations can be actually too low. So, and if your kidneys are healthy and functioning well, a bit of extra sodium will just get excreted out in your urine. Everything should be fine. And we've written an article on this actually, all about the sodium and the blood pressure hypothesis and that sort of thing, which if people want to delve into that in a bit more detail, it's probably worth a read. But it's kind of one of those answers where it's not black and white. It's pretty gray in terms of some people probably would benefit from reducing sodium in their diet. Some people would probably benefit from increasing sodium in their diet. One of the biggest problems that we've seen with a few athletes over the years is people who are extremely health conscious, who train really hard and really try to maximize their diet in every way, eat very, what they call clean, very low processed foods. They read the general health advice about reducing sodium. It's a bit like that situation we talked about with drinking more water. It's like they'll reduce sodium, and because they're motivated, they'll like virtually try to eliminate sodium from the diet, which is hard to do. But if you're motivated, you can get it very low. Then you get a load of knock-on negative effects associated with low sodium. So like any essential nutrient, you can eat too little of it, you can eat too much of it. What that range is depends a little bit on you as an individual. So athletes training really hard will require more sodium or salt than those that are not. And it's about, figuring out where you sit. In general, in the Western world, a lot of people eat too much sodium. But I would say the subset of people that we're talking with, the kind of people who are doing a lot of training, are unlikely to be necessarily in that group unless their diet is really, really heavy on processed foods.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. So many images just flashed through my mind. Then I was thinking, I could embarrass myself here, but I've got the editing tool. So if I'm too far wrong, I can just edit it out. But I was going to ask you, isn't it? I reckon I was in the United States years ago now, and we were on a wet road, and they were sprinkling what I think was salt across the road. And just as you're explaining the sodium absorbing the liquid, I thought, oh, there's a nice little analogy for that just sort of works for me. So essentially, is that what's happening? The sodium is it actually absorbing the water into itself, or is it just sort of blanking it inside the cell? So it's absorbed into the cell, and then the sodium is sort of responsible for its release? Or
what it is with sodium balance, because so when you eat some salt, it will go into your stomach, into your gut, and then be absorbed across the gut wall into the bloodstream. Now, because the level of it dissolves into your blood, basically, the plasma in your blood is quite a salty liquid. The fluid then follows that or moves with it from the intestine into the blood, because your body's trying to maintain homeostasis. It's trying to maintain a set concentration of sodium in the blood, which is about 140 millimoles per liter of the units. If you have more salt so if you eat salty peanuts at the bar, then you'll start to get thirsty a few minutes later, which is obviously why they put them there, because what your body's that is the body's way of saying, right, salt levels are rising, we need to dilute that with some fluid, so let's become thirsty. So then you drink, the fluid gets absorbed and it dilutes it back down again. So that's one part of the sodium regulation thing. And then on the other side, your kidneys are very sensitive to sodium. So if they detect that you've got too much on board, you will pee out a lot of sodium. So you won't be able to tell this particularly without testing it, but when you go for a pee, you would pee out more sodium. If you do the opposite, if you restrict sodium in your diet, your kidneys get very good at conserving it. So when you pee, you'll have very little sodium in there. So that's kind of how it's dissolved into your body fluids, because your body fluids need to be salty for them to function. And then your body is working hard the whole time. It's like having a thermostat that's working really hard to like keep the temperature in the room the same. Your body's got mechanisms to excrete and retain sodium, and also to drive your brain to do things like because when salty food tastes really, really good, that can often be a sign, especially if you've been training hard as an athlete, that actually maybe your sodium levels are getting low. So your body's, gives you a craving for sodium and salt in order to bring it back up again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, far out. That's interesting. I'm still impressed. I'd heard that peanuts at the bar story before, but I'd forgotten about it. I thought, sneaky little buggers. Like, I always just think it's a generous act, but they're just trying to get us to drink more of their beer. Bloody sneaky thing. Wait, Andy, I know, like, at the risk of painting a picture of a more generalized thing, because I know, like, if there's one thing that precision hydration is about, it's a really individualized approach. But just for curiosity's sake, like, are there certain practices that you have in your own day, with the knowledge that you have, that is just a good habit to get into? So I watch a couple of YouTubers, and there's this one guy, he swears by, when he wakes up, he squeezes half a lemon into like half a liter of water, and he'll pretty much smash that straight away, just as a little bit of a kickstart to his body. Other people, I've got apple cider vinegar in my cupboard, which I probably couldn't tell you exactly what it does, but I always just feel healthy for drinking it, because whenever I see something floating in my water, I think this has to be good. Like, whatever that is, it's got to be doing my body a favor. But for yourself, like, do you have any set routines in your day? From, do you wake up, have a coffee, or is it that lemon water? Or
yeah, I'm a creature of habit when it comes to that. I'll tend to get up and drink a glass of water and a cup of coffee first thing in the morning, because that's a habit. I'm, like a lot of the world, I'm probably a certified caffeine addict to a lesser or greater extent.
Yeah, I'm
for
Tyson. Me too.
But for me, in the last few years, I used to drink a lot more coffee when I was younger. I definitely find that, despite the fact there's a lot of evidence to suggest that caffeinated drinks don't have a net dehydrating effect, I think there's an individual variance in that, and I certainly find that 2, possibly 3 cups of coffee a day for me, all of those in the morning, is a way better habit. I'm in the danger zone if I'm drinking coffee after like 12, 1 o'clock. I do if I'm maybe really tired, really jet lagged, but it's infrequent. And then what I'll tend to do for hydration is, obviously, if my training load is hard, I'll make sure that I'm drinking electrolyte drinks either after a training session or in the build up. If it's a training session later in the day, I'll have one an hour or so before, so that I'm pre-hydrating effectively. The rest of the time for me, it's drinking water, and a lot of, I drink a lot of tea, but like a non-caffeinated, like this is a mint tea, but it could be any sort of stuff like that, because I find that that's hydrating and satisfying. And I don't mind if I've got that on my desk, I'll drink the whole thing, and that helps me keep topped up. But I don't try to do anything, all this stuff about squeezing a lemon in or having this thing or that thing. They're not, I wouldn't say they're bad habits, but I don't think they're special either. I think what you do is just limiting highly sugary drinks, keeping a cap on your caffeine, especially if you're someone who's sensitive to it, and obviously alcohol is a diuretic, and generally not an ideal, it's not ideal from a hydration status point of view, like keeping a lid on those. But other than that, it's listening to your body. If you're concerned that you are, a lot of people say to me, I don't know if I'm getting dehydrated all the time. If you're concerned about measuring your hydration, then I always think that the best way to do that is to weigh yourself in the morning each day and look for any big fluctuations, especially around training, because and if you couple that with looking at the color of your pee the first time you pee in the morning, not the pee later in the day, because then you've had caffeine or you've had fluid, and your body's, it doesn't tell you a lot. But when you get up in the morning, if you weigh yourself and you're let's say you're a kilo or 2 down on where you were the day before, if you're a bit thirsty when you wake up and your pee is quite dark, that is a slam dunk that you probably are a bit dehydrated. So if you're going to exercise, then you're going to need to work on rehydrating before you go and do anything too taxing. If your body weight's pretty normal, your pee is a normal kind of straw color or clear color, and you're not feeling excessively thirsty, that's a good indication that actually, you're normally hydrated. And you build up a picture of that. And in between those two, you've obviously got, you could be a little bit down or a little bit thirsty or a little bit dark. And that's the scale. Those three things, if you measure those, will tell you about how proactive you want to be in your hydration that day. And I think if you monitor those, you get a good feel factor for your own instincts and how you get on.
I don't know if I'm just making this up completely, but I've noticed that it could be one of those things where the first time I noticed it, I thought, hang on, that's interesting. And then each time I do it, I've noticed the same thing. So, feel free to give me an education here, because I think I probably deserve one. But the sun's just started to come out over here in Victoria, in Australia at the moment. Jesse and I, since I last spoke to you, we live a couple of 100 meters from the ocean. Today, I thought, all right, I'm going to get my summer body into shape, and I went over and I just went for an ocean swim. I was probably out there for about 45 minutes, and I hadn't drank any more water than I usually would. It wasn't that long, but I got out of the water and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm busting to go to the toilet. And I was thinking, is there any evidence, or is there any like absorption of liquid through your skin? Not that I'm trying to encourage people to get your liquids through just going for a swim, but I was just fascinated to ask you. I thought I've got to take a mental note to ask Andy this tonight. Like, is there any hydration factor just coming through your skin when you've been swimming or when you've been out in water for a long time?
That's a really interesting question. I think that what you're driving at there maybe is, you've been in the water and you've been for a swim, and then you've not drunk anything more, but you get out and you really need a pee. And that's very common. And it's got nothing to do at all with absorption of water through the skin, because that doesn't happen. What it's to do with is it's called cold water diuresis. And what that means is the way that your kidneys work, the way that they balance fluid in the body, is they make you pee when you've got more fluid on board, and they stop you from peeing when your fluid levels are dropping. And one of the ways they do that is there are sensors, there are receptors in your vascular system that measure the blood volume and pressure, and they're in the central part of your body. So if you imagine when you go in the ocean, even if the ocean's reasonably tolerably warm, it's still cold, a lot colder than the air.
So it was cold today as well. It was actually cold.
So what you get is vasoconstriction, which is where the blood vessels towards the periphery of your body and towards the skin shut down, so all the blood moves into the center. So that's to keep your core body temperature up and keep you warm. And as such, your circulating volume, the volume of blood that's circulating through the center of the body, increases. So you get this like increase in body effectively, your body feels like you've got more fluid on board because that central circulation is pumped up. And so what it makes then that triggers the hormones which make you want to pee, because you're reducing that volume. The same thing happens and can happen, not maybe quite as severely, but it happens with cold air exposure. So you often get it, cyclists will say that, you go out riding on a cold day, and within a few miles you need to stop and have a pee, and your pee really clear, and it's just because the same things happen. So it's, if you Google this, and again we've got an article that explains it a little bit, but cold water diuresis is probably the explanation for that. It's very common. It's when you expose yourself to cold water that you need to pee, even if you're not excessively hydrated.
Interesting. Because that's one thing I noticed. Once I was out of the water, it wasn't just like, all right, I need to go to the toilet. It was crystal clear. I was thinking, mate, I've got some secret. I don't think I need to drink anymore. I think I just need to go for a swim for half an hour each day. But no, that's really interesting, man. Dude, I won't hold you too much longer, because I know we've almost been going for around an hour. But is there any way that people who are brand new here can get a bit of an idea? Obviously, you've got your sweat test, a whole heap of resources over at precisionhydration.com. Is there anything else people need to know about what you guys are doing, or what they need to be doing more effectively when it comes to their hydration?
Yeah, I think that one of the best things people can do if they want to learn a bit more is sign up to our newsletter mailing list. It's a really, you know, we've got Chris and Dave on our team who put the newsletter together with the sports science team every week. It's very performance focused. It's all of our best articles. A lot of stuff that we write ourselves, or that our ambassadors and athletes write, about improving your performance from a hydration, nutrition, fueling, and other perspectives. So that's a good thing to do on the website. The other thing is we offer free one-to-one video calls. So if you want to have a call with one of the sports science team here, no strings attached. It's definitely not a sales pitch. You know, you can come on, you can book a 20-minute slot with us, ask us any questions you've got about your hydration, fueling, all that sort of stuff. And we love, you know, connecting with people one-to-one, because like you said, the heart of the business is individualizing stuff for people. So you can use tools on the website, you can read all the blogs and get some background information. But if that still leads to having very individual questions, or you want to run through your hydration approach for an ultra or a marathon or whatever, then hit us up. That's on the footer of our website. Book a call with a sweat expert, and you can book in and have a chat. So we love to hear from people.
No, awesome, man. Well, hey, it's been good to sit down with you again. I know it's been over a year, but you're welcome on here far more than that. So anytime you got something new or something exciting, just give me a message, and we'll do it again. But man, good to see you. Good to see you looking good, looking like a Viking. And
yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, the big pumped up version.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to increase the sodium, and I'm going to increase the liquids, and it could just be a cheat day on the 30th of January.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Hey, I'll cut that off there. But hey, that was great. Thanks again, man.
No, thanks for the opportunity.